Good morning, good afternoon, wherever this message reaches you. I had the pleasure of speaking to Garret Biss, United States Marine Corps retired.
My biggest message, especially for veterans or anybody that's connected with a veteran, serves a veteran, has a veteran loved one, is that regardless of what a veteran experiences while they're in the military, that transition from military service itself can be and is often traumatic. It's the loss of the way that we have come to meet fundamental, basic human needs for emotional and mental well being. That we develop the ways that we meet these needs while we're in the service. And then when we transition out of the service, that foundation is lost. If we don't understand that first, then everything else that we do in pursuit of joy or happiness or fulfillment or success in life is going to be a much harder, if not impossible, battle because we don't first regain the semblance or regain this foundation for our mental and emotional well-being. And then lastly, the most important message is that for anybody that's listening to this, know that you are lovable and acceptable just as you are, that you have worth, that you have value. And if you're in the darkness, if you're really feeling that pain right now, then know that there is a pathway out of that. Other people have gone through similar journeys before, and other people can help you out of that. They can share some of what they experienced. But even if you don't reach out to somebody else, I just want you to know that regardless of what you experienced in your past, you are lovable and acceptable just as you are.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever this message reaches you. I had the pleasure of speaking to Garret Biss, United States Marine Corps retired. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
I'm doing well. I was glad to listen to your TED Talk the other day and speaking about the areas that we don't normally talk about. And I felt like it was very profound and it was very easy to understand even if you were not in the service. What got you into, doing public speaking?
That's a great question. I don't. When I was growing up, I was always my dad had turned me on to a lot of kind of professional speakers, personal development type folks. I don't know that it was true, but my parents say that I used to listen to Zig Ziglar when I was even in my crib. So they'd play that in the background instead of classical music to help me sleep, I guess. So I don't know. I was always kind of interested in the field and just like the idea of people having experiences that they learned and then sharing them with others to try to help improve somebody's life or inspire somebody in a certain way. So I was always kind of touched by that. And then later on in life, it was really during a deployment I had in Afghanistan where I was going through a pretty tumultuous period in my life. And what I was faced with was I realized that I'd been pouring all of myself into my work. And as I was doing that, some things weren't going extremely well around me. And during this deployment, this was in 2013, I had a rare opportunity where I wasn't really leaning into the next promotion or going through the next advancement school or studying for the next upgrade. And it gave me a little bit of space to kind of stop and reflect and think. And what I recall feeling was I realized that I was giving 100% of all the energy that I had into trying to do life the way that I thought life was supposed to be done. Listening to what everybody else said I should invest the time and energy into, and striving to be the best version of myself in the limited capacity or knowledge that I had at the time. And what I realized was I was giving all the energy that I had, but maybe at best I was getting like a 10% ROI on happiness, on joy, on fulfillment. And I came to as the start of this deployment, I kind of had this realization that one of two things was going on. Either one, life was just supposed to be this miserable experience that you suffer through and then die at the end, or two, maybe there's some fundamental like values and beliefs and understandings that I was getting wrong and hoping it was the latter and that this wasn't just a cruel joke to experience this life. It really opened up my mind and my perception to like start questioning things, start listening to new things, doing some soul searching and some research to try to figure out what I was getting wrong. But through this experience, and the reason that I think that that this particular chapter was so profound is because I was given the space and the opportunity to do this. I mean, I was on a deployment, that we work hard when we're deployed, but there was also a lot of downtime and, a lot of downtime to reflect, to read. And because I was taken away from my normal environment and the normal routines and everything back home, we were typically doing 12 on, 12 off. Or in those 12 off, I had a lot of time away from normal distractions and normal routines to really do some reading and reflection. And because of this, I was able to consume a lot of different things, a lot of different books, listen to a lot of podcasts, watch a lot of videos, watch a lot of TED Talks. And what I realized was there were some it seems to be like these threads of some common truth that I probably only picked up on because I was introducing myself to so many different things, at it, in close proximity. And I started to understand some things that maybe I was getting a little wrong, or some perceptions that I had, some ways of understanding, my life experience, understanding relationships with others that I was getting wrong. And it inspired me to, I started to keep a journal of things that I was writing. Then I thought, man, I'm in my early 30s. I've got a young daughter at home. I mean, one of the foremost things that any parent wants to do with their children is to help provide a better experience and a better life, like pass on some of the lessons that we learned, so that maybe I can help her avoid 10 to 15 years of the suffering or the struggle that I went through. So with this in mind, I started to journal a lot, and then my journaling really became my teaching, or attempting to teach to somebody else some things, some insights, or some new awarenesses that I was gaining to an individual that wasn't reading all the same books and watching all the same podcasts and such. And this, so it really took a different kind of flavor, a different kind of voice as I began to do this. And then, kind of that later inspired. This is a very long answer to a very short question that you asked, but that later inspired me to say, hey, let me make something out of some of the struggle that I've experienced. And if I've gone through some struggle or some suffering and I've learned something from it, well, then the way that I can get the most juice out of that suffering is to then turn around and try to use that to help some other individuals. So that really, a lot of everything that I speak about really is just, what are some things that I've experienced, witnessed, learned from working with other individuals? What are some insights? What are some frameworks? What are some perspectives that can be helpful to other individuals? And that's really what's inspired a lot of the speaking that I do.
Well, appreciate the long answer. You actually put a lot of thought into this, and you've probably been asked this a bunch of times.
Not for a
But,
long time though, so I'm glad you brought it up.
well, I can just tell that the passion was just, like, melting off your face when you were talking about it. So, I'm gonna try something different on this one. I'm gonna ask, what is the biggest message that you wanna give to somebody for the listeners? And then we're gonna rewind more to how you were and how you developed to this message.
Yeah, great question. So the biggest if I have that 30-second elevator pitch that I can share a message with somebody that I hope will impart something that will help them. My biggest message, especially for veterans or anybody that's connected with a veteran, serves a veteran, has a veteran loved one, is that regardless of what a veteran experiences while they're in the military, that transition from military service itself can be and is often traumatic. It's the loss of the way that we have come to meet fundamental, basic human needs for emotional and mental well being. That we develop the ways that we meet these needs while we're in the service. And then when we transition out of the service, that foundation is lost. If we don't understand that first, then everything else that we do in pursuit of joy or happiness or fulfillment or success in life is going to be a much harder, if not impossible, battle, because we don't first regain the semblance or regain this foundation for our mental and emotional well-being. So this is an important message to share, not just for people that are connected with veterans to better understand some of the challenges that they're going through from a real human perspective, but I also think it's extremely important for veterans to hear, because there are a lot of veterans that experience some horrific things on the battlefields, and that is a catalyst for, that was a seed that has led to some later mental health struggles. But there's many more veterans that experience some mental health challenges that we can, in part of our cultures, we can lean very heavily on comparison. And there's a lot of guys out there that are like, yeah, maybe I was shot at, but I didn't blow up in an IED, or maybe I was deployed, but I didn't really spend that much time outside of the wire. So therefore, we can kind of downplay our own experience and disconnect us from the real kind of pain or the suffering that we're going through. So that's why it's important for me to share that message with veterans so that they can understand, okay, maybe I didn't experience some of the hardships that other people did, but the hardships that I experienced, they're still very real. They're still very valid. And there's reasons why it leads to some of the suffering and some of the isolation, some of the mental health challenges that veterans experience, and those challenges are no less real than anybody else's challenges. So that's why I think it's an important message. And then the other part of that is, one of the hardest things for me, and we'll probably dig into this a little bit more, one of the hardest challenges for me as I transitioned out of the military and started to, I became a statistic. We talk about the mental health challenges, the suicidal ideations, the substance use. I became one of those statistics. And one of the hardest parts of that for me was not understanding where this internal pain or this internal void was coming from. So that's why this message, and that's why the TEDx talk that I delivered was so important to me, because I want veterans to understand where that pain and suffering comes from, because it's only if you can understand it that you can have some hope or have some vision for how things will get better. I think that's the trap a lot of veterans get into is they find this suffering, they find this void inside. They have no idea where it came from. They don't understand it. And if we don't understand it, it's very challenging to envision that there could potentially be a future where that pain or that suffering goes away. And if you get stuck there too long, that's what pushes too many veterans across that line.
So the question I got for you is, what was your purpose, or what did you want to accomplish by becoming almost a statistic? I know for me, I wanted the self-doubt and the voices to end, not like the schizophrenia, but the negative whirlwind. What were you trying to accomplish when you got to that point?
Yeah, very similar, and I think that's a great, kind of nuanced point that a lot of people don't understand. I understand there's some similarities both between people that struggle with substances, call it addiction, call it what you will, and people that have suicidal ideations. The thought is not, it's hard for people to understand because they're like, well, why don't they think about the consequences? Why don't they think about the future? Why don't they think about, some of the challenges or the heartache and stuff that they're creating for other individuals? It's not that those things aren't considered. The reality is that the pain is so great in the moment that you're trying to do anything that you can do. You're trying to think of any possible solution to end that pain. It becomes so great that your capacity to endure that suffering or that pain in the moment is too great. This is with somebody who struggled with addiction for a long time and they know that they're wreaking havoc in their life and causing negative consequences both for them and for other people around them. In that moment, the pain is so great that they don't have the capacity to think of anything other than, okay, I've got this one way that I can numb that pain, maybe just for a moment, but I can't survive this moment any longer. I need to numb that pain. I think that's very true for a lot of individuals that either have the ideations or cross that line and join the 22 a day. It's not thinking about the future. It's not that you don't care about and that you don't love others. It's that the pain inside is so great and you've lost your capacity. You've lost your ability to continue to deal with it. And all you're thinking about at the moment is, how do I make this pain stop? And I say, one analogy I often give is, imagine you're in a walk-in closet and all of a sudden that house or the closet is on fire. You realize as you start to burn, maybe your skin starts to get scorched. You realize that the only thing that you can do to survive is to get the hell out of that closet, no matter what it takes. And if you have a loved one between you and the door, you might step over them. You might push them out of the way. You might hurt them a little bit as you try to get out of that pain. I think that's very similar. It's a survivalist instinct. It's a very, momentary or myopic thought of an action or a behavior, but it all comes back to just wanting that damn pain, wanting that voice, wanting whatever that struggle is to stop. And this is where I come back to that need to understand the context of what's going on so that you can have hope or you can even envision that things will get better. Because if you know that you only have to struggle for a certain amount of time, we can endure some of the most incredible challenges and the most incredible suffering. We as, service members and especially as Marines, we've been through a lot of things that were horrific, but we also knew that there was going to be a finish line at some point. We also knew that we were going to cross that, the effects, the deployment, whatever it was going to finally conclude and that suffering would cease. In the battles that we face with mental health and in our life, a lot of the challenge is not knowing if it's ever going to stop, if that's ever going to go away. So that's that just compounds the situation and the challenges that you're going through as you're in that pain and in that suffering.
So Garrett, you the so you've been there, I've been there, but I'm curious about your perspective. Why didn't you ask for help, or did you know you can ask for help while you were in this, say, the walk-in closet, or did you actually know how to communicate what you were seeing, what you were surrounded by?
Yeah, so what kind of opened my eyes and where I realized that maybe I was getting too close to drawing that line. This is kind of the way, the story that I share in the TEDx talk. So I realized when the thoughts of how I might do it didn't shock me anymore. I think it's normal, and I think, people are lying if they say that they've never had a thought of how they might or would they might, take their own life or end their own pain. But I think that can be a normal thought. It's normal if it comes into your mind, you're like, oh, that's silly, that's ridiculous, and then you quickly kind of cast it away. Or it's normal if that thought comes to you and then it shocks you that you could even have that thought. What really kind of awoken, I don't know, the reality of the situation for me was when I would have that thought, I would think about, actions, places, methods. I don't know if you can hear that background noise. Sorry about that. I feel like I'm on an airfield again. every time a truck goes by. I don't know if it was when the thought of it felt as normal to me as like, hey, I gotta remember to get milk when I go to the store tonight. I was like, okay, this is that realization started to scare me. And I was like, I don't know how close I am to crossing this line. I don't know if this is like a line I'll cross tomorrow, next month, maybe never, but not knowing with certainty and not being able to tell myself that it was out of the realm of possibility. That's when I realized I was getting a little too close. Cause what does it look like when you're 1 day prior, when you're 1 week prior, when you're a month prior? I don't know. Um, so fortunately for me, that kind of, shook me awake for a long enough period of time to not overtly ask for help, but I did have a friend that had come to visit me, and one of the things I asked him to do while he was with me right before he left was to remove the firearms from my house, and I didn't explain to him why. I don't know that I needed to, but that was a way of me just trying to do a little bit of risk mitigation and at least give myself some more time and prevent myself from crossing that line too easily.
So I have several buddies over here in Billings, Montana that I've had this conversation with, and I
Mhm.
noticed I was getting to a dark place probably about several months back when I started doing these podcasts. I was like, "Hey, dudes, I'm actually getting to that dark place. If I need you, can you hold on to my firearms?" And they're like, "Yep, I got you." And one of my buddies just like, "Dude, all you gotta do is tell me, I'll pick them up. I don't ask why. And when you want them back, I'm not gonna ask you if you're good. I'm just gonna give it back to you." He
Yeah.
said, "I wanna have trust in you." But one of the things that they actually did for me was actually deflated a lot of my own stress. And because I'm like, "You get it." One dude was
Mhm.
a Marine Corps vet, the other dude was an Army vet, and it allowed me to actually have that little bit of space. Because, like you said, you get into that point where it's just like going to get a thing of milk. I go to therapy
Right.
about once a month now, and like, "Do you have suicidal ideations?" I said, "Yeah." It's like, how often?" I said, "Every day." I said, "They're kind of like those eye boogers in your eyes
Yeah.
when you actually
Yeah.
float by," and they're like, "Well, those that's not normal." I'm like, "If you live the life that I lived, you realize that it's pretty normal to have those
Right.
ideations. It
Right.
would be scary when they actually go away."
Yeah, and I think it's not the thought that we have; it's the reaction that we have to the thought. That's really important. But I do want to unpack or share, or talk a little bit about your experience with your friends and why and how that is can be such a helpful thing. So for an individual, and you can tell me if any of this rings true. Some of the hardest some of the hardest things that we deal with are the pains or the suffering that's inside that we feel we can't share with somebody else. And one of the
Bingo.
challenges is, and this is what I talk about a lot, is that those basic fundamental needs. I mentioned them quickly, but I understand our basic fundamental needs for mental and emotional well being to be that of connection. So we're tribal creatures, we're biologically hardwired for connection. Along with connection is the need for authenticity. So the need for authenticity might not be as a parent, but let me tell you what it looks like if we don't have authenticity. It looks like us constantly masking our truth, constantly showing up as a version of ourselves. And maybe I'm wearing this mask so that somebody else, maybe I want, William to think certain things of me. So I present myself in a certain way. Well, the challenge is I have this need for connection, but if I'm showing up inauthentically, then you're not connecting with me. You're simply connecting with the masks that I wear. And while you're seeing this mask on the outside, what I'm seeing on the inside is some message, this repeated message over and over that in somehow or in some way I'm not good enough as I am. So one of the challenges is when we are feeling something on the inside that we feel we can't express, sometimes the shame or the fear of shame or the fear of rejection is so much that we'll intentionally bottle things up and not share it. And this leads to more mental and emotional isolation, which then further strips any connection that we have. So one of the beautiful things that happened when you said, "Hey, if I ever need to call on you, is it okay? Will you guys help me out?" When somebody accepted that, they didn't accept it in a tone of judgment. They didn't say like, "Oh, you're also fucked up. Like you need to go and get some more help or anything." But you were seen as an individual. You were seen and expressed as an individual. You weren't judged for the potential struggle that you were going through. You realized that there was this dark thing that maybe you were holding on to, and the moment that you got to share it, you didn't experience immediate rejection. So that allowed you to relieve some of the pressure of the thing that you're holding on to. And then the fact that they're just like, "Hey, man, yeah, absolutely. I'll come and I'll get it. And if you tell me you want them back, I'll give them back to you." This also recognizes the agency and the responsibility and the trust that they have in you. And all of these things come back to the estimate that we have of ourselves, our self estimate, and the way that we feel about ourselves. And this is a huge part of that foundation for that mental and emotional well being. So, in such a simple exchange, so many beautiful things happen that could allow you to relieve some of that pressure, feel supported, feel that sense of connection. Even if you weren't hanging out with or talking to them regularly, you can still feel that sense of connection because it's like, hey man, there's this dude or there's these people that they didn't judge me, they didn't reject me, they don't see me as any different, they don't see me as broken. They recognize me as a human going through a human experience, and you're being able to express that and be seen for you and the experience that you're going through. That's a very powerful way to build that kind of community and leverage that sense of connection to deal with some of the challenges.
Yeah, you're spot on with it. When you talked about wearing the mask, I use it as a way that we filter the information coming through, and we only show shrouds of who we are underneath it. But
Hmm.
during the whole time that we are self-rejecting parts of us that we don't
Yeah.
think that we're good enough for another individual.
Hmm.
And when we actually wear those masks for way too long, we are also now seeing that filter of what they're saying, what they're doing, how they're acting is a way of a personal attack against us. But
Mm.
how often do we allow ourselves to really be vulnerable and share these type of things? So when you were able to get to that point of being able to be vulnerable with people, what was that sensation that you felt?
So for me, it was quite a process. So yeah, I mean, we can selectively kind of share with individuals. So like kind of stepping back a little bit, the challenge is any seed that we have or any thought or any part of our truth that we're afraid to other people might find out. This is what leads us to this inauthenticity or this wearing of masks. I think the greatest cost is not in the rejection or lack of rejection, but it's in that presumption of rejection that inspires us to hold on to these things, to hide these things, to bottle things up, to keep things in the darkness. If you experienced something, or if you did something, or if there was something that you were dealing with that you were afraid other people might find out because other people would then reject you, the whole time that you're holding on to that, you're really experiencing the cost and the consequence or the pain of that rejection. The rejection hasn't happened yet. But because you think it's so real and because you're afraid of it, you're holding this part of your truth, you're hiding this part of yourself, you're still experiencing some of the cost or some of the consequence of that rejection. So this is why it can be so powerful. One of the things I talk about a lot is post-traumatic growth. And if you're familiar with the Boulder Crest Foundation and the Avalon Action Alliance, they have a whole program for veterans and first responders that is all about post-traumatic growth. One of the things in there that they share that is so important for allowing post-traumatic growth, and we can dig in more to what PTG is, but for allowing the process of post-traumatic growth is the state of or the practice of disclosure. So finding safe, supportive environment and connections where you can disclose some of these things. You can take out some of these boulders that you've been carrying or some of these seeds that you've been bottling up inside and share it. And when you can do that in a safe, supportive environment, then it helps relieve some of that pressure. It helps you understand, oh, maybe I'm not so broken and so messed up. And maybe the truth that I know about myself is okay and is lovable and is acceptable. And you get to experience some of that a little bit more. For anybody who's in recovery or you spend a lot of time in the rooms, in support groups, this is a huge benefit that you get out of the support groups. It's going to a safe, supportive environment where you can share things in a confidential or in a closed session with other humans that you haven't felt safe to share with other people outside of that because you have some common experience and common understanding and common struggles. But the amount of relief that can come and the amount of healing that can come from experiencing this, okay, I'm going to share this thing and I'm not instantly rejected. It's like, okay, so I've been living my life based on this belief that if other people were to know this about me, then I wouldn't be good enough, and everybody would reject me and they'd hate me or they'd ostracize me. So when you can experience that, this is a huge part of that path towards healing and towards recovery or towards post traumatic growth. So what did the experience look like for me? Well, really, it was a process, and what I understand, and this is a lot of the work that I do when I'm coaching individuals or providing trainings, is I understand that first, before we can connect with others, we need to reconnect with ourselves. We need to reconnect with the truth of the value and the worth and the skills and all the positive things about us. And sometimes this can even come, for anybody that's ever done any kind of breath work or diaphragmatic breathing or box breathing or many other grounding or self care practices, there could even be a step before we cognitively reconnect with ourselves And that is allowing the parts of us inside to reconnect. So we have a sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system that one excites us and is excited with fight or flight. The other one is what helps us relax. And in the long and in prolonged or high states of stress, the balance between these two systems can get disconnected really, and our ability to self-regulate becomes very challenged. Hold on, there goes another truck. So the first thing that I understand is reconnecting, the internally. So reconnecting the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, reconnecting the heart, the brain, however you want to think about it, whatever terminology, to get to a more relaxed state so that we can go through some more of the cognitive processes and the reconciliation or some of the practices that we can do. And then that first practice is reconnecting with the worth and the value that you do have. So when we're in a high stress state, when we are in fight or flight mode, our mind filters out everything that's not a potential threat because we're trying to survive. So potential threats are things that we don't like about ourselves, weaknesses that we have, mistakes that we've made in the past. That's why these things can ruminate. We can have like this cloud of thoughts constantly ruminating in our mind of all these negative things about us, because anything that's negative about us, anything that we assess as a negative, whether that's that weakness, that failure, that mistake that we made, the thing that we're embarrassed about, those things could become potential threats to our connection with others. So in this high stress or in this prolonged stress state, when we're in this fight or flight mode, these are the typical and sometimes the only thoughts that will come pass through our awareness or pass through our consciousness, because we are in that survival state. We don't want a potential threat. And if I made a mistake yesterday and last week, and if I repeat that mistake, then this could be a threat to my overall wellness or my success or my sense of connection. When we can reconnect with, expand that aperture, and also recognize and validate many of the strengths that we do have, many of the wins that we have, many of the good things that we've done in the past. This is what I call giving credit where credit is due. So I don't care how many mistakes you've made, I don't care how many weaknesses or how many defects you have. You as a human also have a tremendous number of strengths, of past wins, past successes, great character traits. There's also many other things that are true about you. And through some simple reflective processes, what we can essentially do is expand that aperture of our perspective to not just see the negative things about us, but to also recognize and validate some of the positive things. This is what helps us reconnect with that sense of self-worth and that value. Once you've done this, then you begin to see yourself in a little bit better light. And this is what really helps facilitate that sense of connection. This is what gives us that sense of safety and being a little bit more vulnerable, because if I'm connected with my own worth and I can see myself in a lovable and acceptable light because I've given myself credit where credit is due, then the pain and the cost or the consequence that I feel if William rejects me is not as great. It's not what my entire foundation of self-worth is balanced on. So when we can reconnect with ourselves and we can start to see ourselves in a more positive light, then this is what helps us feel that sense of safety in going out. And one of the mentors, and this is really what sparked my journey. I had the great fortune to be connected with a coach and a mentor. If anybody's familiar, his name's Jack Canfield. He wrote the Chicken Soup for the Soul series and has a lot of other books on the New York Times bestseller list. And through the work that I did with him, this is really what kind of guided that journey. So my path to recovery from substances and mental health wasn't really a traditional path of just clinical treatment and or going away to a treatment center. It was really more guided by what would be referred to as positive psychology and coaching and mentorship. And this is the journey that I experienced. So I understand in some of the darkest places that there was this tremendous void inside. My mind was right there, just swirling with all the negative thoughts and the fears and the worries and the defects and all the mistakes that I'd made. But through working with this coach and this mentor, he helped me begin to reconnect with some of the positive things in me. And he helped me um, to then establish that foundation where I could begin to express more of my truth, because my entire foundation for self-worth wasn't wrapped up solely in the acceptance of other people. He often talks about this poker chip theory, and he says, if your self-esteem is represented by poker chips, and you're sitting down at the table to play a hand of poker, and you sit at the table and you got three poker chips because your self-esteem is pretty exhausted, and you've been in this stress state for a long period of time, and you're more mindful of your weaknesses and of your defects than you are of any of the strengths or the positive traits that you have. And you sit down at this poker table with very limited self-esteem, just as maybe we show up in life with very limited self-esteem. So if you sit down and you only have three poker chips and you look around and everybody's got these big stacks around you, you're going to play a very defensive position. You're not going to, you're not going to take any chances. You're not going to risk anything, because if you only have three poker chips and you lose two, that's a big part of your stack. Or if you go all in on the wrong hand and you lose all three, like, you're out of the game. So how does this show up in our life? This shows up as, if we don't have that sense of self-esteem or that foundation for our own sense of worth, then we're not going to go out in life and take any risks. We're not going to go apply for the job. We're not going to ask somebody out to lunch. We're not going to, try to reach out and make a new friend. We're going to isolate. We're going to stay very, very safe. We're going to play life very, very small. And our life experience is going to continue to devolve and erode and get smaller and smaller. If you want to continue to grow, if you want to lean into your potential, if you want to experience everything that you're capable of, then you need to build up your stack of self-esteem. You need to you need to get to that place where you can sit down with 100 chips. That way it's like, hey, I'm going to apply for this job. Don't get the job. Okay, I lost 3 chips. No big deal. I've still got 97. Or, hey, I want to ask this girl out, or I want to ask this guy out. If they say no, no big deal. I lost 2 or 3 chips. I'm still in the game. If we can show up to life that way, then this is what helps us with that platform, and this is what helps us with that foundation for really leaning into the potential. This is the sad thing, is that anybody that's served in the military, you've already demonstrated to yourself and to the world that you've got a tremendous amount of value. You got a lot of potential. There's a lot that you can do. There's a lot that you're capable of. What saddens me the most is when all of that is washed away or all of that is lost. And now we see so many veterans. So that I'll talk about the statistics. So as a population, about 19 million veterans, the veteran population is at least 200% more likely to experience mental health challenges or struggle with addiction. 1 in 5 GWAT or post 9/11 veterans is going to be diagnosed with PTSD. Probably 2 or 3 times that is going to experience some very limiting symptoms of post traumatic stress. When you take some of the most capable, some of the, the most skilled, the best experienced individuals in America, and now they're really hiding, or they're really living small, and they're not living into their true potential. For one, that's egregious for the individuals that raised the right hand, that stepped forward, that wrote that blank check to the United States to do whatever they want with it, in exchange for protecting our nation. It's extremely sad that those individuals don't get to live that same level of abundance, of happiness, of joy, of fulfillment, of contribution after they transition from the military. It's also, from an economic or from a cultural or societal perspective, we're taking the top 1 or 2% of our society, the most capable, the most skilled, the most those with the greatest potential, and now we're not getting that return. Like, there's so many that are kind of living their life covered by this shadow or this dark cloud that's affecting the way that they show up. So for every reason, it's a huge challenge.
So, Garrett, there's two questions that came in while you were talking. One is, how do you take proactive steps to stop the automatic or pre-rejecting of yourself? And the second one
Mhm.
was they want to hear more about post-traumatic growth.
Yeah, great question. So how do you stop that kind of preemptive negative self-talk? So one of the things that I understand is that we can't remove thoughts from our head. So if we're trying to just stop, like, okay, I've got this voice, I've got this sentence, I've got this phrase that keeps repeating. I don't want to, I want that damn phrase to go away. I don't want to keep hearing that. Well, we can't just remove that thought or that words from our mind. It creates a vacuum, and very quickly that same phrase or that same thought, that same feeling is going to get sucked right back in. What we can do instead is that we can replace it. So right now, William, if I said, um, to conjure the image of a green apple in your mind, and think of that green apple, and look at the color, look at some of the sheen on it, look at the size of it, imagine how well it tastes, the sweetness or the tartness of it. Okay, now stop thinking of that green apple. It's very difficult to stop thinking of something unless we replace it with something else. So the way that you would stop thinking about that, if I said stop thinking about that green apple, is to bring the image of anything else into your mind. It could be, a beach scene, it could be a loved one, it could be anything that you bring into your mind. Same thing goes with these thoughts, these negative, repetitive thoughts that we get. We need to give them something else to think about. We need to give our mind something else. So, one practice that I would typically go through is just, guiding somebody through a quick diaphragmatic breath work. And I can even demonstrate that towards the end if you'd like. So, guiding somebody through that thing that helps them reconnect with, recenter themselves, calm their central nervous system so that they can be more, have a greater capacity for cognition, for analytic thought, for reflection, and then start to make a list of wins and success. One of the first practices that I offer to a coaching client or anybody that I'm, working with in a training is make a list of 100 wins and successes that you've had in your life. And I'll work with a lot of people in addiction recovery. And one of the first responses I get is like, come on, Garrett, I'm 30, I'm 40, I'm 50 years old. I haven't had 100 wins and successes. Well, for me, that's a litmus test of where they are, where their mindset is, and how they feel emotionally about themselves at the time. Because I don't care how many mistakes you've made in the past, you've definitely had hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of wins and successes, especially if you're willing to give yourself credit for a win that is of such small magnitude that it seems insignificant, but is of equal magnitude of a mistake that maybe you made last week that you're going to continue to carry over your head for the next couple of weeks. Um, so sitting down, just making a list of wins and successes. So, you can start really small. Like I learned how to crawl, learn how to walk, learn how to run, learn how to tie my shoes, learn how to ride a bike, whatever that looks like for you. It's not what you list that's important. It's the number of things that you can list that is really where you get the most value and the benefit. So doing this when you're in a calm state, coming up with a list of wins and successes. Another thing that you can do is come up with a list of strengths. Very similarly, we can be very cognizant of the weaknesses that we have or the defects that we have. And unfortunately, if that's what we're most aware of, then it puts us in a position where we're navigating our life based on our weaknesses. Like, oh shit, I'm not good at math. I'm not going to go down that road, or I'm not going to try to do that thing because my weakness here, this skill set, could be a potential threat. So that's a very reactive way to live life. The other way to approach life is to be very aware of and take ownership of the strengths that you have. Again, everybody has weaknesses, everybody has strengths. It's really where you focus your mind and what you give awareness or recognition to that's going to guide your perspective. So similar to that list of wins and successes, you can create a list of strengths that you have. There's some online assessments you can do that are free. Take maybe 10 minutes and it'll list out for you what are your top character strengths. Making this list and taking some ownership of it is another piece of ammunition that you give to your mind when those negative thoughts and those ruminations start to come in. So one of the so it's most effective to do this when you can be in a very calm state where you can reflect on and you can create these lists. But what's beautiful about it once you have it is you can keep it around you. So if I was at my home office right now, I'd show you on the wall, I have a list that I've previously made of 100 wins and success and successes that I've had in my life. And right below it, I have my top 5 character strengths. When my mind starts to ruminate on these negative things, then I don't have to recall them. It's very hard to break that habit, that thought habit. All I have to do is simply turn my attention and give myself something else to think about, some recognition to think about. So those are so if you want me to dig into that anymore, I mean, I do multiple hour presentations about all of this stuff. So if that's helpful, then we can talk more about post traumatic growth. If you want me to dig into that anymore, then I'm happy to do so.
Well, honestly, it's just the conversation is just, like I talked to you before on the phone, is more of, regular dialogue and actually hearing from people's perspectives, and
Mhm.
I would like to at the end, be able to get your information, be able to put it into the chat for people that are listening, and then also when I put it up on the YouTube and everything else, it's so that they can be able to find you, and they can also listen to your TED Talk because like I said, your TED Talk was very powerful, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was it's very similar to the mission that I'm trying to do is that unspoken trauma. And
Mhm.
obviously, like you're coming out of it and you want to help navigate people and help them guide them through that shadowy path because it is a familiar place, like going to buy milk.
Right.
And if because different people are at different points when they're listening to this, like sometimes it is their spouses that are listening to this, sometimes it is the kids, sometimes it is the person that's suffering. And if you're anything like how I was, people could be knocking on your door, but you can't hear them because it is actually very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And when we're actually at that point, it's like, how do we, and just hearing different messages is hopefully you'll be able to provoke or agitate a person to be willing to listen or change.
I love it. So, and kind of back to the title of this, of normalizing men's mental health. I do want to dig into trauma a little bit more. So, trauma is a term that we throw around all the time, and often when we think of trauma, we think of more of the common thoughts that come with something that could be traumatic, whether it's a major assault, whether it's an accident somebody was in that they survived. Maybe their house burned down. Maybe they witnessed the death of somebody very close to them. These are all things that are classically thought of as potentially traumatic. So one thing is trauma is not the event that happens, but it's what happens to us as a result of it. And there's a couple traits of something that's traumatic. For one, it's not individually defined. So two individuals can go through something very similar, and for one person it becomes a traumatic experience. For the other person, it doesn't. What's true of something that's traumatic is that it either changes an assumption, like a baseline assumption that you have, a value or a belief that you have, or it changes the way that you view the world or your place in the world. And the reason that that part is so important is because it helps me understand that so many more things than a car accident or a violent assault or the death of a loved one are things that can be traumatic. Anything that we experience that can change an assumption, a value, a belief that we have, or the way that we see ourselves in the world is by definition traumatic. And I think this is important to understand because there's some very simple or very benign or very nuanced things that can happen that can change a value, a belief, or an assumption that we have. And this is why I say, and I'll defend this with all the breadth that I have, that that transition from military service itself can be traumatic. If we go
Mhm,
through an experience that changes the way that we see ourselves or the way that we understand the world or our place in it, or it changes a value or a belief that we have, then that is by definition something that's traumatic. So for an individual that goes through their military career, their experience, and they have this strong foundation of connection, they have a strong sense of self-worth based on the skills that they have and what they're called to do and how well they can do it, it presents a certain assumption or a certain belief about who they are as an individual. When you go through a transition, you lose that. You lose the connection. You lose the coherence between the values and the skill set that you have and what's now called upon you as a veteran or as in the civilian world. Those things create fundamental shifts in the way that we see ourselves and our place in the world. The other thing that's really important to understand around trauma is that we often talk about many of the definitions even allude to the fact that all post trauma has to be negative. That we look at the costs of it, we look at the maladaptive coping mechanisms, we look at the abnormal response to normal stimuli, we talk about post traumatic stress, PTSD. But sadly, what we don't talk often enough about is the other side of the same coin, which is post traumatic growth.
mhm,
If you experience something, if you experience an event or a circumstance that alters a fundamental value, belief, or assumption, that alteration doesn't necessarily have to only be negative. Sometimes people experience something and they realize, hell, I'm a lot more capable than I thought I was. I was able to survive something I never thought I could before, or I was presented in a situation where I didn't think that I would do very well, and I demonstrated to myself that not only did I survive that, but I actually performed very well in that circumstance. This can alter beliefs that we have about ourselves or values or understandings that we have about ourselves that are in a positive light. And
mhm,
and even through some of the work that we do, and this is what the whole roadmap for post-traumatic growth is about, it's about helping us connect with some of the positive changes that occur in our life as a result of trauma and not solely focus on some of the negative changes that happen as well. And again, come back to that same analogy of this perspective or this lens. Like imagine you have an aperture on a camera and it's really zoomed in onto whatever you're focusing on. If your field of vision is only on the negative consequences and the negative costs of the trauma that you've experienced in your life, then that is what your reality is. I mean, your entire perspective is filled up. The whole field of vision is filled up with the negative costs of the trauma that you've experienced. Well, if we can go through some things and expand that aperture, this isn't saying that you're not going to still have some of those negative challenges and some of those hardships from past trauma, but it's also going to validate and recognize some of the positive things that have happened as a result. One of the most fascinating studies, there's a great book. It's called Struggle Well. I believe it was published through Boulder Crest, but in Struggle Well, they talk about a little bit of the history of this field of study of post traumatic growth. And what they saw, really what I guess sparked the researchers' interest in this field, is they were doing a study of Vietnam veterans. And they were trying to figure out how many Vietnam veterans, of all those that deployed, of all those that were in country, how many of those veterans returned home and had PTSD. And they realized that as they looked through the treatment records and the service records of these individuals, they came to a conclusion about 30% of all Vietnam veterans that were deployed experience post traumatic stress or PTSD in their life. And then they were wondering, okay, what about the most severe situation? So what about those that had the greatest level of hardship and the most the most trying or the most suffering while they were deployed? What about the 591 POWs during the Vietnam conflict? And when they studied the POWs, what they found was that, and take a guess, how many POWs of the what percentage of the POWs do you think had PTS or post traumatic stress disorder when they came home?
About 10,
About 10.
10%,
So 10%. So
10%, yeah.
30% of the general population, and 10% of the POWs. Yeah, what I recall, they reported that just 4%. So a lot of people say
Hmm.
70, 90, 100%. They're thinking, if you're tortured and you're confined, that's going to be such an egregious experience that you're definitely going to have post traumatic growth. What the study found was that only 4%. So then they're wondering, okay, what the heck happened with these POWs that were in the most trying, the experience the greatest hardship that led to such low rates of post traumatic stress or post traumatic stress disorder? And that's what kind of illuminated this whole field of study of post traumatic growth. And what they found was there's certain things that happen that allow somebody to experience post traumatic growth. And I'm going to cheat here for a minute and pull up a reference just so I don't miss one of these. Um, but the let's see I'll come back to it. So
Viktor Frankl
go ahead.
talks about this in Man's Search for Meaning, and he actually talks about how it's not always about the trauma that we are. It's actually obviously it's a connection to people, but it's also how people respond to our traumas when we are talking about it.
Yes, and that comes back to that having that safe, supportive environment where you can disclose things, and that disclosure is a big part of the healing experience from it. It's this is, we deal with isolation and everything as we're going through our internal battles, and we feel that we can't connect with others, and now we're back in a civilian environment where 98% of the people around us might not be veterans. There can be a lot that we hold to ourselves because we don't think anybody else will understand it. Well, that creates its own costs and its own consequences with the isolation. And again, if we're holding on to something for fear of somebody's misunderstanding or some rejection of us, then this just compounds that suffering that we're going through. So when we can express parts of our truth, and this is a big reason I did that TED talk, because I want people to understand, okay, this is what the veteran's experiencing, and not come to some conclusion. I do a lot of talks and a lot of presentations of mental health professionals. And sadly, I'll ask, go around the room, okay, raise your hand if you've ever heard of post traumatic growth. Maybe 10 to 15% of the hands will go up. So if thousands of individuals, maybe 10 to 15% even know that there's this whole field of study recognizing the positive, the positive ways that somebody can change. This other presumption that I maybe I thought it myself at one point, but I certainly saw it to be true in the mental health world, was that this presumption that if a veteran is expressing symptoms of substance use disorder or PTSD, that it must be correlated or must tie back to some hardship on the battlefield. Maybe it's a military sexual trauma, maybe it's a battlefield mishap or hardship, or combat related experience that they had. And sadly, while that is true for a lot of veterans, it's not true for most. Yet most veterans, when they transition out of the military, they have some version of this trauma experience, the trauma of military transition. So that's why I wanted to get this message out there. It's okay. You can talk to an individual. I don't care if you ever served or not. When I talk about that trauma of military transition and the loss of connection, authenticity, and meaning, which are fundamental human needs for all of us, you can understand that. Maybe you didn't serve and then transition out of the military, but there's been a transition in your life where you lost some kind of connection. There's been experiences in your life where you felt you couldn't show up and express your true authentic self, where there's been times in your life where you had a greater sense of meaning and times when you lost that. So when you can contextualize it that way or look at it through that lens, that framework, then anybody, service member or not, veteran or not, can kind of connect with and understand. And this gives that permission for that veteran to now share their story in a way that it can be understood by non-veterans or by clinicians.
Yeah, I believe in honestly what you were just talking about, the post-traumatic growth, and I actually do believe about the fear of talking about it. Now, the question I have for you about your own recovery, how was it when you started to work through a lot of your traumas? How was it coming on the outside of this unfamiliar area for some time?
Yeah.
Because
So
at least
so
for me, go ahead.
go ahead. No, yeah, go ahead.
No,
Say
go
that
ahead.
again.
No, I was going to ask, how was it for you when you started healing and trying to change up your old patterns into new patterns?
Well, there's certainly some resistance to it. I mean, anytime that we're trying to kind of reprogram or change our muscle memory, and this is why it's a long process, and it takes intention, and it takes some commitment, because the way that we operate is, if we are triggered, one of the things that happens is really our prefrontal cortex or our higher cognitive self, our higher functioning mind, the thing that can rationalize and connect dots and see things for what they are. That portion of our brain, that function of our brain, in many ways goes offline. So if we're triggered, if we're in that high stress state, if we're in that fight or flight mode, what we have access to at that time is not our rational thought and our ability to, connect the dots and see things for what they are. What we have access to is our muscle memory and the habits that we've developed. So we develop habits as a way of reacting or committing some action without having to think through it. So this is very, our brains, our body, in many ways, are hardwired first for survival and for protection. So one of the brilliant functions that our brain has is that when we've identified an action as something that can help mitigate a threat, then that many times becomes a habit. It becomes our muscle memory. The challenge is that as we're going through life or we're going through a recovery journey, the things that we're most prone to do when we're in that stress state is those habits that we've developed over time. So it can be very hard to kind of overcome that. And this is why when we're in the military, all the training that we do it ad nauseum, because you have to have developed that muscle memory to do the things that you need to do so that when you're beyond your capacity to think in the moment because you're in that fight or flight state, you need to have that muscle memory and those habits so that you can follow through on the things that you need to do on the battlefield or in the moment. Same thing happens in life if we develop this habit of this maladaptive coping mechanism or this thought pattern that we get into. It's very hard to overcome that if we're constantly in that fight or flight state. So, learning some of these self regulation practices, doing things more regularly, developing new muscle memory and new habits. So, if you do a practice like if you have a gratitude practice or if you do the wins and successes list or any of these things, the best time to do it is not when you need it. The best time to repeat these things and reinforce these things is the times when you're calm, because that's what helps you develop that muscle memory. So yeah, there's a lot of resistance. Again, a long answer to a short question, but there's a lot of resistance in that change. But every day is a new opportunity to go back to, to kind of reset and go back to. I don't know if you went through any survival training, but they talked about bounce back as like, don't think about what you did last minute or yesterday. Today, just think about what you're doing right now. This the more that we can focus on that, give ourselves, cut ourselves some slack for anything that maybe we did yesterday that we didn't want to do, and and focus on what we can do right now. What's the best next thing that we can do right now? That's what helps that growth happen. So, something I remind people all the time, especially those that struggle with addiction, is like you didn't get to that dark place, you didn't get to that rock bottom overnight. It was years of a slow slide to get to that place. So, your journey to recovery, your journey to wherever you want to be in your life, it can happen a lot faster than that slow slide, but it's not going to be overnight. It's going to take some time. And every day, it's not about looking at what you messed up or what you wish you would have done differently, but recognizing the growth that has happened and the things that maybe you did a little bit better today than you did yesterday or last year.
Yeah, and the, follow-up question I have to that is how does your family react to you when you started healing? Instead of being the old predictable person of how trauma or how you were handling your own internal stress, how did, like, people start reacting and behaving to you when they started noticing the change?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was a very lonely and isolating period for me. So right around that time, I was going through a divorce, so my family dynamic changed a lot, and then I was single for quite a while for those next couple of years. So as far as my immediate family, it's kind of hard to pin down. But as far as my mother, my sister, my nieces, my daughter, um, I think the way that you show up is the way that people show up around you. So as I started to show up differently, people used to show up differently for me. And that's one of the big kind of ahas that I had when going back to the start of this conversation, when I was talking about some realizations that I had in Afghanistan, when I was really trying to figure out what were these things that I didn't understand about life that I was getting wrong. One of the things that became extremely apparent to me was that the energy that we show up with or the energy that we project to others in our relationships or in our conversations or in our interactions is more often than not the same energy that we'll get back. And the hard truth that I realized was if you show up with this feeling of you to another person, if you show up thinking like, hey, you take me for granted, or hey, you don't see me, you don't respect me, you don't listen to me, many times that's the energy that you're going to get back. So it can be a self defeating kind of downward spiral. if you show up with the energy of, hey, I'm grateful for you, I see you, I respect you, I want to know you, I want to listen to you, I want to be there for you, then in many times, in many ways, that's the way that other people will show up. And I love doing experiments all the time. I used to do this, and I would go into and be very um, animated about it, but to kind of test this theory that this isn't just in our deep relationships, so this is in any interaction that we have. I make it a point whenever I go, or either when I answer the phone or when I go into a coffee shop to order something, I'll stop for a moment and I'll just say, "Hey, how are you doing today?" If they got a name tag on, I'll call them out by name. And it's weird because it kind of breaks this normal habit pattern that they're in, or this normal kind of a process that they're in when they're like, "Oh my gosh, somebody just stopped and now they're seeing me as an individual. They're not just barking an order at me and then moving on down the line." And it's amazing, like, if you can stop and hold a smile for a second, just look at somebody and recognize them and acknowledge them, the energy that they have towards you shifts instantaneously. And so if you want your environment to change, if you want relationships that you have or the way that people interact with you to change, then change the way that you're showing up. It's one of the easiest things that, well, maybe not easiest, one of the simplest things that we can do.
So Dale Carnegie talks about keep calling people by their name, and it's also when they talk about even from the psychological perspective, when you call them by their name, it really just perks them up. It releases some type of serotonin, it makes them actually feel happy,
Right.
and then all of a sudden they're actually being seen as a human.
Yeah.
And you being an officer, the enlisted, like they kind of a lot of times, I'll say for people like myself, we felt like we were bull sponges was one of the words, but the word that came across my mind was expendable.
Hmm.
And going to a coffee place and taking your person's order, it's like, am I just expendable? Do they actually care about me? Am I
Right.
just another person? And the best way I could say this is like when I used to go back to New York City, I felt like it was a sea of ghosts. And it was just you walk past people,
Yeah.
you'll see thousands of faces, but you won't remember anybody. Everybody becomes cold, shut off, and they're not really becoming this humanization. And I kind of feel like when I was actually healing, I was putting on this facade, the ghost faced of,
Hmm.
hey, you know what? You can't see me because I don't want you to look into it. And if anything that you get closer and closer, it caused me to become more prickly.
Yeah.
But that's where the healing begins. And then what I realized is that, and the reason I asked you this question is how many relationships in my past that I self sabotaged
Hmm.
because I didn't want them to know me. I didn't want
Right.
them to see me. And then trying to either heal them or rebuild them, it they're wait and I felt like they were being very predictable to me. They were waiting for the old Will to
Hmm.
immerse. And I was curious if that's how it was for you of, hey, I'm waiting for the old Garrett to be explosive or the old Garrett to be short.
Sure.
And that's usually a sign with us of how we were able to get the job over with and get through it.
Hmm. Yeah, certainly. So, yeah, there are probably some relationships that I still have where they still see me mostly through that lens of how they used to know me. And that's you know, it's the reality. We can do the best that we can for ourselves to make improvements, but we got to also give grace and allow other people to think and experience what they want to think and experiences. And I think the goal should for us should be that we don't allow that to affect the way that we see ourselves. We know that we're doing the best that we can any day, and we're showing up as the best version of ourselves that we can. And if other people don't want to see and experience that, then there's only so much that we can do about it.
Well, Garrett, like I had a bunch of questions I was going to ask you, and then we just jumped into something totally different off topic. And I had to say, I really appreciate your perspectives and your tone and the way that you're able to clearly convey your message. You have definitely done a lot of work in your past, and I appreciate the fact that you were able to give such a beautiful TED talk and also keep being inspirational. So, for sake of
Did
time,
you have one last question that you want to get out there real fast, or is there anything at the tip of your tongue?
well, the tip of my tongue is when you started to do this healing journey and you started helping people heal, how much did that impact you personally? Because and I'm gonna load it up a little bit more, is that when I started working as a peer specialist, I didn't realize I was going to change immensely from this.
Mm.
I'm curious about your perspective of helping people change, and what did that do for your internal dialogue?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the beautiful things that happens of it is that it allows us to recognize some of the pain that we experienced in the past wasn't for nothing. We're able to kind of transmute that and turn that into value and benefit for somebody else. So for one, it helps me better digest some of the struggles that I went through because I can see it in the kind of the grand scheme of things. Like, okay, for who I am now and what I can do now and how I can serve other people now, I wouldn't want to take that away. So that means I wouldn't want to take away some of the pain and the suffering that I've been through. And this is on that roadmap of post traumatic growth. The last element of it is service. What I understand is that as we grow and as we change ourselves and begin to see ourselves in a new way, one of the things that helps us again relieve a lot of that pain and that suffering that maybe we've carried with us or experienced along the way is seeing it in a different perspective, not seeing it just for the cost that it had, but seeing it for the benefit that it brought to our life. And that's one of the beautiful things that happens as a coach, as a clinician, as a peer support specialist, when we can take some of that pain from the past and we can actually get a positive ROI from it because we realize that it was of value and of service to our life. That has a tremendous value on helping heal some of those wounds and lessen the pain from anything that we might be carrying from the past, because I don't want to change who I am. I don't want to change what value I can provide to others. I like being able to share things from my experience and knowing and hearing how it helps other people. I wouldn't want to take any of that away. So therefore I can't want to take away any of the pain or the struggle that I've been through.
Is there any other big message or any other messages that you would like to leave the audience? And then also, I would like for you to help people be able to find you if they're looking to get in touch with you.
Yeah, certainly. So, yeah, a couple things. So, for anybody that's interested, I've got one program. It's called the Warrior Reset. If anybody wants free access to it, basically what it is, it's 4 daily practices that I found to be most beneficial in helping facilitate that emotional, that spiritual, that mental reset. You can go to thewarriorreset.com and you can have free access to that. There's a place you can either just download a workbook and you can kind of go through it on your own, or you can enter in your email and then I'll give you a daily reminder for 10 days and I'll include some audio training or some kind of audio lessons that kind of go along with the workbook. So for anybody that's interested, go check that out. Also, for anybody that does go there, and if you drop your email, I've got something that's in post production right now. It's a 7-part series of videos for individual, or actually 8-part series for individuals, for veterans that are in recovery, either mental health or substance related. And as soon as that drops, then I'll be sure to send that email out. Also, you can find the TEDx talk that I did. You can either go to garrettbiss.com or you can go to unspokentrauma.vet and you can view that. It's like 10.5 minute TED talk, talks about the connection, authenticity, and meaning piece. And then lastly, the most important message is that for anybody that's listening to this, know that you are lovable and acceptable just as you are, that you have worth, that you have value. And if you're in the darkness, if you're really feeling that pain right now, then know that there is a pathway out of that. Other people have kind of have gone through similar journeys before, and other people can help you out of that. They can share some of what they experienced. But even if you don't reach out to somebody else, I just want you to know that regardless of what you experienced in your past, you are lovable and acceptable just as you are. You don't deserve that pain and that suffering that you're experiencing. And I hope that you will find some ways, either by yourself or with the support of somebody else, to navigate that journey and get to a better place.
Well, Garrett, I appreciate it, and I apologize that we went totally off script in what we were going to talk about, but I really enjoyed the conversation that we just had.
Well, thank you so much, not only for inviting me, but for this platform that you've created. I mean, we need to talk about these things more, I think, and it's of great value to anybody. So I really appreciate that.
Hey, Garrett.